A big obstacle for me has always been whenever I try to make content, whether it be just streaming teamfight tactics or talking about D&D or making a video essay, I always have this issue where it doesn't feel good enough, and I don't know that it ever will. I'm never really at a point where I feel like, oh, this is high quality. This is equal to the people I watch and why I want to do it in the first place. So, I feel like in order to combat that feeling, because I think the feeling is mostly invalid, I think I would much rather put out a bunch of shitty video essays than put out nothing. I'm gonna try and just start uploading me rambling, no editing. I don't even have my lights on. Just a bunch of messy ramblings, ranting videos. Uh, Mainly for me, just to get over that feeling. So yesterday, I started sprawling. I started very reminiscent of Charlie Day in It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia when he's in the mailroom and he finds out about Pepe Sylvia and he starts going crazy and starting a conspiracy about how there is no Pepe Sylvia and there is no Carol in HR. Um, and it's because he's been drinking coffee and smoking cigarettes all day long every day and huffing glue. But anyway, the idea is that he's rambling and he's trying to prove this theory that makes no sense and really has no importance whatsoever. And so my version of that is not that mail is not real. Instead, it's backstory for Dungeons and Dragons or any similar role playing game. Maybe even other storytelling mediums. But I think the main purpose is one that you have other real people playing characters. Um, and the way this started was I was trying to organize like just a physical problem of how do I get my lore uh, that I keep in Obsidian. I use Obsidian for note taking. I've tried World Anvil and OneNote and Google Docs, and Obsidian's what I've landed on for the past 6 months or so. I really enjoy just the amount of formatting you're capable of doing, and anything that draws back the program they have plugins for. It's been a really beautiful experience so far in terms of personal notes, but sharing it costs $8 a month, and I'm horribly unemployed. So $8 a month is just a permanent -8 from my very, very small bank account. So I was trying to find a workaround. I was trying to find an alternative. Um, and mainly I landed on a couple of ideas, almost all of which feel kind of unsatisfying, which is fine. Um, they definitely would just be a little hitch for me to run a campaign. I don't think it would be much of a problem. But then my brain slingshotted into, is the problem I'm even trying to solve a relevant one? What if I played a campaign where I gave my players absolutely no lore? Like they have to find the lore as they play. I mean, if you think of any video game ever, that's exactly how it works, right? You don't read all of the little lore tidbits in Dark Souls before playing. You read them as you go. I mean, if you're me, you don't play the game at all, and you just fall asleep to videos about it. But for the average player, right, you go in knowing nothing about the game, and then you figure it out as you play. And I kind of love that feeling. My favorite example is Disco Elysium, where that game does a beautiful job of you wake up, you have amnesia, you don't even know about the concept of money. Obviously, the player does, but the character has no idea. So when the player asks a stupid question like, you know, why are there so few people in this town or blah blah, like any kind of question the player would want to know. But if you're playing a character that grew up in this town, why would that, like, if you're playing a campaign that takes place in Baldur's Gate and you grew up in Baldur's Gate, why the fuck are you asking really basic questions about Baldur's Gate in character in order to figure it out? And that feels terrible. So the way that the vast majority of tables has decided to solve this for a TTRPG is that they have the player. the actual person at the table ask the DM out of character, and then there's a little out of game hiccup. There's no in game hiccup, and most people are fine with that. In asking people about this, most people say that's not a problem. Don't pretend that's a problem. Just do that. Um, but I do think it's a problem because as much as I like valuing in game and the world of these characters more than like the kind of hiccups and the small things at the table. I do think the small hiccups at the table affect the tone in game because I mean everyone experiencing the characters is still a human, right? You can't ignore the out of game hiccups the way your character can because the character isn't aware it exists, but you are very aware it exists. In fact, you're far more aware of that existing. I think it might actually matter more, right? I think the feeling of the table, trusting your DM, trusting your other players, enjoying their characters and the stories they're telling, it's probably more relevant than what actually counts as canon and what actually exists in universe, right? So it got me to a point of, well, the way that video games solve that problem is they make the character not really know shit about the world, right? Amnesia is one example, but Amnesia, the concept, not the video games. I don't know what they do for lore, but Fallout New Vegas, right? Another favorite of mine is a great game where your character actually reasonably should know a lot about the world, and they kind of just pretend that doesn't matter. Um, I guess you could make it's not in the text, but you could make an argument. The reason your character is asking, "Oh, who's the NCR?" Blah blah blah. Even though you're a courier in the area, you most likely would have interacted with these people. And then one of the DLCs explicitly says that you did, and you did a bunch of shit that you don't remember. Um, and it kind of just works because in a video game, there is this like surrealism idea of most text in video games is aware of the fact that there is a player and a character, and they treat you as such. And maybe that's fine. Maybe the way to get past it is this kind of meta commentary esque narrator voice where I could turn those moments of, oh, I think my character would know, who the mayor of this town is. Can I make a history check? And then they make a history check, and I'm like, yes, you do. His name is blah blah blah. Here, I'll send you a text document about him. Um, I could maybe do some kind of fourth wall breaky, self aware, like ironic narrator character. I think that is possibly a way to resolve that issue. But I also think having no backstories is a way to resolve that. And if you're shocked when you hear that, having no backstory in a D&D game, well, there's a thread of Reddit commenters who agree with you because most of them were very, very against the idea. But essentially, I whether it be amnesia or some other solution, I pointed to isekai, um, which is a big anime trope where you get sucked into a video game or a different world or some kind of thing outside of your existence. And so you are a living, breathing person, but then the rules and the information of the world you're in are entirely foreign to you. So it's the same thing as amnesia, where it's just like you don't know anything about the world that's relevant. You're asking questions about the world in character, out of character. It's all the same. And that feels good in terms of dispensing lore, um, which some D&D players might say, "Why are you even doing that?" But I come at it from a storytelling perspective, and essentially all storytelling is drip feeding lore, right? Like, yes, I don't have to ramble about a king that died 7 centuries ago. I do think that gets annoying. That is just like, why didn't you write a novella about this king? Why are we playing D&D? But I mean relevant, right? Like they have a problem they're trying to solve. Maybe it's curing their amnesia, and they find a book on the ground that is like a journal of a previous victim who end up being some important figure in the world, and then they have to track down that important figure. Right? That's all lore. That's all drip feeding. information about the world, and I think that that is becomes much more fluid if they know nothing, because the players are gonna know nothing. So if the character's supposed to know things, and we have to play catch up, it feels strange. And so essentially the trade-off, the issue is, do I rid my players of what seems to be a very, very popular, a very, very passionate interest in writing sometimes pages of backstory before the campaign even starts about what their characters have been up to and who cares about them and who hates them and um, all these relevant actions in their past and people and ideas that make them who they are. Um, do I rid them of that in order to make the campaign itself feel better, so that in character they can ask these basic questions of, "Oh, this town doesn't deal in silver, gold, and platinum pieces, you know, they have paper currency. Wow, that's so strange. Like, why do you do that?" You know, but if it's like my character's a grand wizard, I'm a historian, well then why the fuck would you ask? Like, you probably have read about it, right? Um, and then also having the Grand Wizard have to pause the entire universe to turn to this godly figure that doesn't exist and be like, "Hey, DM, how does that work? I think I would know that, right?" And having to play the game of would I know this or not, right? So sometimes it's like, I think I would know this, wouldn't I? And my answer is no. Like there's no books about this. Um, so I think that whole thing is strange, and I think there is a way to avoid it. Now, I had lots of people respond to this by saying, "Oh, Amnesia is such a cliche. Amnesia is so generic. I'd rather die than play through a generic Amnesia plot." But I don't know. I don't know that that's inherently true. I tend to think war movies are boring. I tend to think that in general is quite bland. But you know, even recently we watched Fury. I thought that was a fantastic movie. It's very much a war movie. Most of it's just war. In fact, probably all of it. Hacksaw Ridge is a great movie. There's plenty of great war movies. Uh, that stay true to the idea. It's not like I like war movies that, you know, ignore the war part. You know, there are some times where I'm cheering along at explosions and plane crashes and shit and being like, "Holy shit, that's so cool," because they did such a good job of bringing me into it. And I think the same can be said about Amnesia plots because, I mean, Disco Elysium is probably one of my favorite pieces of fiction I've ever experienced. And yeah, that I think the game is super aware of how generic the premise is. I woke up and I don't remember the world is not a super original idea. But saying, spoilers for Disco Elysium, saying, I am just such a sad, miserable addict that I drank and drugged myself into a coma where I just like partied and don't remember anything. I forgot. Like they take amnesia to an extreme, even of I don't know how the world functions at its most basic fundamental level. I think they did a fantastic job of it. So I don't think anything like that will get in my way. I don't think, "Oh, the story's such a cliche. The story's so bland." I don't know that that exists. I think that is purely a writing issue, not a concept issue. I think you can make any concept work. I think I could even have a campaign where the core premise is like, oh, the guy, the quest giver ends up being a really bad guy, and he's the evil NPC. You could do that, you know, and that could be. You could start in a tavern. You could add all three of those things. You could have starts in a tavern with amnesia. There's a good guy quest giver, but he turns out to be a bad guy, and have a fucking amazing story to tell. And weird the weird meta commentary where you talk about that and how generic it is could be part of why your story is good. So yeah, I'm gonna continue to basically do what I just did on camera for 15 minutes, but in my head while I watch shitty YouTube videos for probably the next week or so until I land on a conclusion. But I'm right now leaning really heavily towards the idea of, I think, just getting rid of the idea of let's know who you are before the game. I think that's locked in. I think I'm pretty solid on. I don't want pages upon pages of backstory. I want none. I want you to have a vague idea of who your character is, and we will figure it out as we go. And the difficult part of that isn't the concept. I think the concept works fine. In fact, people do it in Dungeons and Dragons all the time, but it's considered like a casual idea. It's considered, oh, we're just here to roll some dice and kill some monsters and have a good laugh. But I think you can do it for a really, really intense, emotional, like fucked up, dark story too. I think I will absolutely attract the kind of players who will want to give me pages and pages of backstory, and they will feel a certain way, a negative way. I'm so congested. A negative way about uh, being told I want zero backstory, and I like that. I think it almost fits. I think it almost fits the tone of the story. The story is a very dark one. The story is a very intense one, and I think similar to how games like Pathologic or Fear and Hunger will almost make the gameplay painful. Like it's not fun, and that might be a controversial statement, but I think that the creators would say it's not fun, but that's not the purpose. I don't know. I would assume most of the fans of those games understand that, but maybe not. Um, I think the purpose is like art can be suffering. You can suffer to get to the point that art is beautiful again. In fact, I think that's usually the good ones. Um, I think usually the best art is making you feel bad, however you want to picture that. Um, I mean, think of movies that make you cry. Some people cry at a movie and say, "Wow, that was terrible. I was just sad the whole time." But I personally walk away from a movie that, if I'm crying, if I'm genuinely upset at a movie, that's it's getting added to a fucking list. Like I'm writing a review about it on some website nobody will read. Those are my favorite movies. Um, and so I think there is some appeal to me in playing a D&D campaign that is just the thing that I think largely due to Critical Role has almost become the main appeal. It's hey, come to my table and you are at level 1 an absolute hero with plot armor, you're beloved, your dad is emperor of the universe. You have all this rich deep lore. Like Geralt of Rivia is jealous of how much how much shit you have in your backstory. And please don't take that as mocking or being insulting about that existing. If that's what you like, that's what you like. I think that that's very fun. I've played in games like that. I've ran games like that. Critical Role is probably the largest D&D influence on me ever. But I think at this point I'm moving away from that, and wondering I'm wondering if having a campaign that moves from that in such a radical way that it is jarring for everyone involved is going to be the best way to tell a story. I don't know how to end this. I'm pretty sure I'm done speaking, but